Hey everybody, Jimmy Smith back for my final Classic Fight Club. I'm not going to be doing any more. The only reason I'm coming back for this one is it was one I was going to do, and then you should all know about the tragic news about Ben Askren. For people who aren't keeping up on things, he got a staph infection that ended up becoming pneumonia. He needs a lung transplant. His wife's last update is that he is basically heavily sedated all the time. Can squeeze somebody's hand. That's about it. They're waiting on a lung transplant. It's looking pretty grim for Ben Askren. Hopefully, he's able to get the transplant and make the comeback, but he is in deep trouble right now. And so everyone knows that. And so I was going to do Ben Askren versus Dan Hornbuckle for my next Classic Fight Club. And, you know, in honor of Ben, my last one's going to him. I don't know Ben personally. We obviously interacted. I called all his fights in Bellator, so I interacted with him when, you know, we did fighter meetings and stuff like that. But I don't know him personally. But, you know, he's 40 years old, and he's fighting for his life. He does have a family. And it's just a tragic situation all the way around. And it sucks. And so my last Classic Fight Club, as I said before when I did Classic Fight Club, I know the hardcore fans really, really love them, but they don't do well at all. And so I wasn't going to do any more, but I'm doing this one for Ben Askren. It's his fight with Dan Hornbuckle in Bellator. A lot of people didn't see it, and we didn't realize it would kind of like launch Ben Askren into, you know, what he then became, which is a really top welterweight. But anyway, a little background before we start the video. I was on the radar for Bellator to be their color commentator. Bjorn Rebney calls me, and he says, hey, what do you think of the tournaments I have set up? Well, I had done my research, and I knew everybody in those tournaments. And at 170, which is my old weight class, I had either trained with or called a bunch of the fights or knew the background of everybody at 170. And the way I said it at the time was Dan Hornbuckle is probably your number one. Ben Askren and another guy named Jacob McClintock, who had great jiu-jitsu, but was once again just starting his MMA career, just like Ben was. They're dark horses, but they're pretty green. You had guys like Judo Jim Wallhead, who had been around forever, Ryan Thomas, who had just had more fights at the elite level. And so Ben Askren was a guy that I mentioned, you know, 4-time finalist in the NCAAs, 2-time champion, really dominant. He's got a shot, but he's just starting his MMA career, and he's taking on really experienced guys. It's going to be very, very tough. So let me start the video. 1, 2, 3, go. And Ben Askren, this was in Kansas City, which, of course, he went to Mizzou. That's where he wrestled, like I said, 4-time finalist, 2-time champion. So there was a little bit of, you know, not a little bit, there was a lot of bias. I mean, the fans were very much behind funky Ben Askren, but it was his 6th professional fight. So leading up to this is the finals of the welterweight tournament, 2010, his first year I was there. And in the opening rounds, a weird thing had happened where Ben Askren fought a guy named, and by the way, this is in the middle of not a shopping mall, but like this like entertainment area in downtown Kansas City. It's called Power and Light. And so that's why it's a little funky. I had to walk down these stairs and stuff because it was crowded with people. So anyway, in the opening round, the opening two, Dan Hornbuckle had beaten Tyler Stinson and Steve Carl. Submitted both of them pretty quickly. I think they were both round one. As you can see, as he gets into the cage, he is tall. He's a really big 170, I think 6'1"-ish, but a really big 170. The opposite side of things was totally weird. Ben Askren, his first round, he fought a guy named Ryan the Tank Engine Thomas, and he got a Japanese necktie on Ryan Thomas. Referee steps in, stops the fight, and Ryan was fine. He wasn't out. It was a terrible stoppage. And so Judo Jim Wallhead, who he was supposed to fight in the next round, got stuck in Europe because of a volcanic eruption. I don't know if you guys remember this in 2010. There was a volcanic eruption, and it grounded a bunch of flights in Europe because, you know, the ash would jam up the engines and they couldn't fly. So Judo Jim Wallhead couldn't get into the United States. So they had Jacob McClintock. His first opponent was Ryan Thomas. Ryan Thomas beats Jacob McClintock, TKOs him. And so Ben, in the semifinals, fought the same guy again, Ryan Thomas, in a rematch. Beat him again in a really, at the time, Ben got upset with me. I called it a really sloppy fight, because it was, where he would get mount, and then he'd lose it, and he'd get these dominant positions, and he'd lose it. There was a lot of, like, rolling around, right? And so he had beaten the same guy twice, and neither fight was great, obviously. And So leading into this fight, we didn't know a lot about Ben because he had fought the same guy twice. So we didn't get a chance to see him against, all right, Jacob McClintock, who had great jiu-jitsu, or somebody that could maybe stop his takedown a little bit. We didn't see any of that. We had no idea. So walking into this, Dan Hornbuckle was a heavy favorite. This was, I believe, his 24th professional fight. As I said, it was Ben's 6th professional fight. And like I said when Bjorn Rebney called me, like, Ben's talented. He's certainly has a wrestling background, but we don't know how that's going to translate in MMA. We have no idea. Dan Hornbuckle had knocked out Akihiro Gono in Japan with a head kick, absolutely blasted him. And like I said, on the way up in this tournament, he had submitted Steve Carl and Tyler Stinson. Now, both of those guys went on to have wins in World Series of Fighting. These were not scrubs. Steve Carl, I believe, fought Kamaru Usman in the Black Zillions versus American Top Team Ultimate Fighter. So these were not scrubs, and Dan handled them on the ground. So we thought, okay, Ben will take him down for sure, but he's proven to have 6'2". I say he was 6'1". He's 6'2". You see the record, he was 21-2 heading into this. 9 knockouts, 9 submissions, so you get it done either way. And by the way, production people loved Dan Hornbuckle. Right? He's Native American, he's got the mohawk. He spoke in sound bites, right? Good-looking, articulate guy, had an exciting style. So as far as TV went, the guy was gold, absolute gold. And the winner of this, obviously, was going to fight the Bellator champion, who was Lyman Good, for the title. Now, Ben Askren, once again, hadn't lost, but 5-0, 1 knockout, 3 submissions, and younger, 25 years old, right in his prime, 4 years younger than Dan Hornbuckle, but an unknown quantity. So there had been a little bit of trash talk back and forth. I don't remember exactly what it was, to be honest with you, because I was working. So you try and keep up on this kind of stuff, but I'm worried about calling the fight. If they aren't pushing and shoving in front of me at the weigh-in, I really don't know most of the time. So there was some trash talk, and you'll see it here as they get to the center. This was a little bit of an issue. They meet in the center, Jason Herzog, my boy, is the referee, best in the business, and Dan Hornbuckle won't touch gloves with him. It's going to stick a little bit, by the way, in this fight. So we all knew Ben, and having seen him at Mizzou, funky Ben Askren. It's a really funky style that's really hard to deal with. In wrestling, we didn't know necessarily how it would translate in MMA. So when they come out and they start striking, Dan Hornbuckle, very good striker. The dude's really, really sharp. Ben has no interest at all in standing with Dan Hornbuckle. And look at this single leg. He's just like a dog with a Frisbee. Funky, weird takedown, right? Knee cut pass. Also, if you've ever seen Ben Askren fight, Ben has, and I hate to say it, but it's true, he has the worst striking I've ever seen in the elite level of MMA. But it's really weird. It's goofy. It's like, as you saw with in the moments he had to stand with Dan Hornbuckle, it's so goofy that it's hard to kind of figure out, and you end up falling for stuff like this, the funky takedowns of Ben Askren, because he doesn't strike with clean lines. Right? He's not on balance with his striking, so it really disguises his takedown, which is already weird. So Dan Hornbuckle beat, as I said, Tyler Stinson and Steve Carl, submitted them both from closed guard. One thing about Ben's style and just the way he grapples, it's really hard to get close guard on him. He never stops long enough for you to kind of really lock him down. And some guys use a takedown and then put heavy physical pressure on you. Ben does that, but he also moves a lot. You'll notice this, and I'm from Carlson Gracie. You can see the shirt I'm wearing. They tend to put a lot of pressure on you, and they're not the biggest movers in the world, Carlson Gracie style. Ben moves a lot, along with his ability to put pressure on you. So it's hard to tell exactly where he is. So already short, time into the fight, Ben isn't just getting the takedown. He's also super duper active. And he would take some criticism later on in his career in Bellator for being boring. And, Dana White said it. Like, he's a really boring fighter, blah, 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 blah. In this fight, he was just moving all the time. And it really kept Dan off balance. So Dan now trying to use his long legs, trying to use his guard. And Ben, from what I've heard, I've never grappled with him myself, but I've heard from a ton of people, he's just funky strong. He doesn't look strong. He's not the most shredded guy in the world. He's not particularly big for 170 pounds. Like, he's about my size-ish, and I'm a small 170. But Ben is just really strong when he gets in grappling positions. He's been grappling his entire life. So everything about Ben, and Dan is learning this right now, is deceptive. You don't get how much trouble you're in until you're in it. And you don't realize how heavy he is until it's too late. Now, Dan is in his own corner right now. He was American Top Team. Conan Silveira is in his corner. Obviously, coach over at American Top Team. And all these positions that he's trying to like funk his way out of, Ben is just one step ahead of him and won't allow any transitional movements. And he doesn't necessarily overcommit trying to take the back. So, he's always in a position where he can then back out and go back to this kind of wrestling ride. He doesn't secure positions like a jiu-jitsu guy does. And it is death of 1,000 cuts where like no particular shot in this ground round. This is called a crab ride, very popular in wrestling. None of this ground pound, like no one shot does anything, but it's just like a mountain of pebbles coming down on you. Where, okay, it's still enough of them and it's going to be a problem. Now he's threatening with the arm triangle. But once again, not moving like a jiu-jitsu guy. If you're watching this and you understand jiu-jitsu, you'll go, okay, a jiu-jitsu guy would do X, a wrestling guy would do Y. He does Z. He does kind of a mix of them. Got on the mount here, and in the Ryan Thomas fight, he had mount quite a few times and just didn't hold it very well. And you could tell in between fights, he worked on that a lot. Where Ryan Thomas was able to buck him and move him and do all this stuff that Dan Hornbuckle just right now isn't able to do. And you're trying to deal with the funk of this guy, and it's not working. And Ben unloads at the right time, right? His instincts are getting better and better. And Dan able to move, and this was the time, okay, Dan's up, but you got 30 seconds to go in a round in which you were getting owned, and Ben just sits up and goes for another takedown. The frustration of being in a position like this against a guy I don't think you expected to give you this kind of fight is nuts. And it is very disheartening. And so Dan Hornbuckle, I think, and we all thought certainly that not only Dan was going to win, but we thought he might walk over Ben with the skills he had shown previously. And after this round one, it was crazy. Now, they don't show in between rounds. They've cut it out for television. One of the things I like to do is in between rounds, look at both corners, right? Not just the advice they're getting, but how do they look, especially someone who has lost round one, who isn't looking good. Dan's posturing got worse and worse and worse. His head was further and further down every round, where he seemed to kind of like he was getting broken. He didn't expect this kind of a fight. And Conan Silveira was trying to charge him up and get him motivated, which was never an issue for Dan Hornbuckle. He was always a very, very motivated guy. And it just seemed like mentally he got broken in that first round. Easy transition to mount with 4 minutes left. So I don't think Dan expected not just a takedown, but this transitional game, right? This ability to flow and move so well. Now, one of the reasons I'm glad we don't have any volume so you guys can hear me, but one of the reasons that I never listened to this fight is I was sick today. I called this fight when it first happened. The day the fight happened, I got a sore throat. I wasn't that sick. I didn't feel that bad, but I lost my voice completely. So, and also in broadcasting, when I'm calling a fight and it's live and there are people around, I got to really project, right? You got to really push your voice. And by the time this fight rolled around, I had no voice at all. And they kept bringing me tea and trying to help out. And I just sounded like this. It was terrible. So I hate listening to this fight. I've never listened to it since because I was so pissed that I just happened to lose my voice on fight day. But, Hornbuckle, not only was I had no voice, it was also very shocking to see a guy that we thought so highly of get dominated, and the way he was getting dominated by a guy who was so early in his career And one of the things it shows as Ben is transitioning here, trying to get that knee cut, which he goes right to every single time, Ben was really good at kind of sticking to his strengths. Like, I'm not going to learn regular jiu-jitsu. I'm going to make everything super funky. I'm not going to learn regular striking. I mean, you should have learned more striking. But the point is, I'm going to kind of stick to my strengths and do everything kind of funky and weird. And, when you start MMA late, which Ben Askren did, he didn't start until after his international career. Remember, he made a 2008 Olympic team. When you start that late, you don't have time to pick up the fundamentals in 3 or 4 different styles. You don't. Like, you're going to have fundamental wrestling, well, even though his wrestling is real funky. Great wrestling, but you're not going to learn, great jiu-jitsu or great striking with the time you have left. You got to really, go with what you're good at. And Ben did that, I think, a little too much. It caught up with him later in his career. But you see why he was so dangerous at this point, where he was like, hey, look, my striking isn't great. My jiu-jitsu isn't super technical. So I'm going to do it. Like, how many people get in a head scissor position here? Who does that? Who does that? Almost no one. So Ben's like, all right, I mean, I'm not going to be a world champion in jiu-jitsu or anything like that, so I'm going to use it my way. And you see physically in this round number 2, Hornbuckle's offering less and less and less. He was in full guard for a little bit in round number 1. He was able to kind of, use some of his jiu-jitsu. This time around, there's almost nothing. And the problem with a guy like Dan Hornbuckle, who was just, he was a very emotional fighter. He was skilled, but he was also a very emotional fighter. He was a fiery guy. I liked, his personality was really interesting. But they can be a little up and down. Like, when you're able to break him out of his zone of confidence, like, it's hard for him to get back there. He's such a confidence fighter. And he's been turtled up and beaten up for, at this point, 4 minutes and 20 seconds in this round. After another 5 minutes where he just got absolutely owned. So, you start mentally going, I'm just not going to get out of here. And I see me over there in the corner, and I'm stunned at what I'm seeing, where not just how little resistance Dan Hornbuckle is putting up, but also the development of Ben Askren so early on in his career was absolutely insane. And this is kind of the criticism of Ben a little bit. You see in this position, he just doesn't land haymakers. He just doesn't. He never had any power in his punches. It was never one big shot. It wasn't even a shot that could cut you or really cause any problems, but God, they never ended. They absolutely never ended. Also, end of round number 2, this was an outdoor fight. I remember it being hot, but not like brutally hot, right? So, you're always wondering about somebody's gas. And Ben's gas never wavered at all. Very, very good at, keeping it at a pace that he could handle and not letting Dan Hornbuckle carry him too fast, especially in the striking. Boom, once again, easy double leg. That's crazy. That's, junior high stuff. In that he never let Dan stop his takedown long enough to strike, which he would have trouble with his cardio maybe if you made him strike. Dude, Ben could grapple in his sleep for an hour. He's been doing it his entire life. So that's really the thing to me, is he never had to get out of this, short punches, movement, takedown mode. Dan couldn't get him out of there. Body triangle heel from the guard, that's not going to do any good. That's not an offensive guard. If you body triangle in the guard, you can't walk your legs up and really do anything. It holds somebody there, for sure. You can't really do a whole lot with it. He was trying to bump hip sweep. Ben, too stable for that. And when you go back, there is a triangle set up. You saw him briefly think about it, but nothing there. Now, look at this pass, right? Head down, hips up, looking at the other guy's chest. That's not how you pass. Doesn't matter. Ben's going to just, do funky stuff that, you don't do past white belt in jiu-jitsu. And his balance is so good, and his body positioning is good that he makes weird stuff work. That knee cut pass, again. Now you're in a position where brief triangle danger, but that's not going to work. Now this Kimura, I remember this. He really went for it. Doesn't matter. Without hips, it's not going to work. So you see he's not in guard. He's in side control. All you're going to get from here is a sweep. okay? Like this, okay? You can sweep, but then you got to move, and Ben is too good at moving. As soon as his head is free, he's out. Now, Dan should have stabilized here with everything he had and try to keep Funky Ben from rolling. Even if you don't get anything, but he tried to kind of over-transition. He tried to take the back because he knew he was in deep trouble and was losing rounds and tried to step over and didn't secure it. He tried to step over too early. Ben's going to funk his way out of that. Period. He's going to funk his way. And that was really a desperation move that, if Ben were in trouble in this fight, that would have been it. That would have been the sequence. That Kimura to back take, but the back take wasn't set up properly. Dan was just looking for answers and not finding any. 2.5 minutes left to go in round number 3. But it was nuts. And then all that physicality, that the size advantage of Dan Hornbuckle was completely neutralized. Completely. Bigger, stronger guy. It doesn't matter if you're on bottom and the other guy's on top of you. I can be on top of a heavyweight. I don't know. He's a heavyweight. And Ben was able to stabilize the whole frickin' time. Stabilize, move. Stabilize, move. Land punches, pass. Dan just never knew what was coming. He had no idea. And also, if you're used to dealing with things in a traditional jiu-jitsu way of blocking things like you would a jiu-jitsu guy, Ben doesn't roll that way. It's really difficult to find a way out. Trying to trap the arm here, but if you turn, you're in guillotine trouble. So, Dan just tries to curl up and stay defensive. And being in this situation is so damn miserable. And it was the same intensity for Ben Askren from round number 1 to round number 3. Dan trying to funk roll his way out of it, do something. That is Ben's style. You're never going to get away from him that way. And here it is just trying not to get beat up too bad before the final bell. And look at that, the weird pressure, right? Hips up rather than hips down, right? Willing to roll with the guy, and it's going to keep his head buried so he can pass to his right. Ben's looking at the clock, going, I got this guy. Under a minute left. And we were all cage side stunned. We were. And it was hard to talk about at the time, calling this fight and going, man, I don't believe how dominant this was and how we weren't prepared for this. And I was calling the same fight basically for 15 minutes. Short ground and pound, movement, try for a couple submissions, maybe never overcommitted to a submission, and just owned Dan Hornbuckle, the guy we thought was going to win the tournament. Now, when this is over, and it's over in 10 seconds, what we didn't know, none of us, was how it would affect the future of both guys. After this win, Ben Askren ends up taking on Lyman Good for the title. Absolutely did the same thing to Lyman Good, that's his wife. Did the same thing to Lyman Good to win the title. And kept winning and winning and winning in Bellator. Went over to ONE. And then went over to the UFC. And like I said, his limitations caught up to him in the UFC. They did. So the idea that he had his problems. They weren't exposed in this fight. They were exposed later. His lack of stand-up and all this stuff kind of caught up to him. But in this run, it was amazing. Dan Hornbuckle went off a cliff. He went off an absolute cliff. He had a win against Brad Blackburn. That was in Bellator. Then he had a loss to Brent Weidman. Then he had a loss to a guy named Luis Sapo Santos, who ended up fighting Ben Askren and won. Lost to him. Went over to Japan and lost, and that was it. Lost to a guy named Roger Carroll, who was like a guy you brought in, let's face it, to lose in Bellator. Ended up submitting Dan, and that was it. And his career never really recovered from this loss. He was never the same guy. But Ben Askren kept going on and on and on. And now, once again, tragic situation. He's in big trouble. And hopefully he gets his transplant and everything works out for him. But he's a young guy. He's in a very difficult situation. So hope he pulls through. But that's it. That's my final Classic Fight Club. Ben Askren, Dan Hornbuckle. Hope you enjoyed it.